Welcome everybody to this webinar on electric vehicles. First, I'd like to acknowledge that we're organising this event from the lands of the Wurundjeri, and I offer my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm John Brennan, a member of Clean Energy Nillumbik Committee and its previous president. For those of you not familiar with Clean Energy Nillumbik, we're a community organisation of volunteers working with our Shire Council, local enterprises, ratepayers and like-minded organisations to take the Shire of Nillumbik on Melbourne's northeastern edge towards a zero carbon future. Do have a look at our website, there's a lot of information there, including a promo for a forthcoming bulk buy opportunity for reverse cycle air conditioning. Now, there's an information session about that on the 21st of November, and you might like to get further details on the webpage. This evening, all the activities in the background that enable this webinar to take place are being managed by Chris Moss and other colleagues from the Clean Energy Committee, and my warm thanks to them on behalf of us all. If you have any technical problems or general comments during the session, please use the chat button, which you'll find on the bottom left on computers, not sure where it is on telephones. If you have questions, you can enter them at any time using the question and answer button, which is in the bottom, at the center of your screen at the bottom. Keep the questions fairly short if possible, please. We imagine that we'll probably consolidate similar questions together so as to get the maximum coverage during the course of the whole evening. The presentation and the Q&A will both be recorded and available to download in a few years' time from the Clean Energy Nillumbik website. So that housekeeping done, our presenter tonight is Bryce Gaton. Many of you will know Bryce as he's given lots of presentations about electric vehicles. He's currently Vice Chair of the Victorian branch of AEVA and editor of their national newsletter. And we're very fortunate to have Bryce giving us what I'm sure will be an extensive and informative session. At the end of his presentation, we shall open Q&A, and that's your opportunity. With which I say, thank you, Bryce. The screen is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, John. And I'll try and do my quick screen share as I find it on my own computer. And how's everyone going? Can you see that?
Fine.
Good, thank you. I'll start off tonight with the what, why, when guide. So choosing an EV in Australia, because Australians' EV choice is somewhat different and limited, or actually different, it's more limited than what we would have overseas, but it's certainly coming in quite a big wave coming over the next couple of years, and there's certainly a few available now. So I'll talk about the terminology, because we in EV land tend to talk a lot about lots of acronyms, so I'll quickly throw those ones up first in case I use them as I go. And then I'll talk about what's available in Australia and elsewhere, and that's new and second-hand, and what's coming overseas. And then I'll talk about the benefits of an EV, both to the environment and to yourself, and when it might be worth thinking about yourself moving from your current internal combustion engine or ICE through to an EV. So flicking over to the first slide. Here we go. Bit of EV terminology is always fun, so I'll throw them in now. The ones I'll be talking about tonight are your plug-in electric vehicles, and there are your two on your left. The BEV, the battery electric vehicle, they're the simplest form of an electric vehicle. They have generally a nice big battery, although the original ones, the original Leafs and things had 24 kilowatt hours. They're getting up to 80, 90, even 100 kilowatt hours in some of the Teslas now, and they're talking about 200 and more in the big SUVs and utes that will be coming out in the next year or so. For the next one along is the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. They have generally a smaller battery, because that makes them a little bit cheaper, because the batteries are still one of the most expensive, or are the most expensive component in an EV. So, but they are coming down in price, by the way. So the BEVs are getting closer and closer in price, as I mentioned a bit further down the track, to the other cars. But the plug-in hybrid have had this niche for a while now, that are a bit cheaper because they had the internal combustion engine, or ICE, to back up these smaller batteries. So if you wanted to go beyond the range of the battery, it would take over and would drive you to the next charging point or the next petrol station. So they can run on a battery only. So I tend to call them sort of proper electric cars as well, because they will run on battery only. The third one along is your hybrid electric vehicle, or HEV, and those ones basically use a small battery and electric motor to save energy as you're braking. So it's effectively a petrol saving car rather than a electric car. Although they use electric technology, they don't have a plug. You can't charge them, and they don't run electric only. Well, technically they can a little bit, but that's another story. So the hybrids, as I'll mention a bit later, are actually lumped in with petrol cars, and they'll become actually banned in some years' time in some countries for sale. They're basically making sure that there'll be only battery type electric vehicles. The FEVs and the BEVs will be the ones. And the last one on the list there is the fuel cell electric vehicle, or FCEV, sometimes called the hydrogen car. A lot of people in the past thought the hydrogen car would be one that burnt hydrogen in much the same way as you burn petrol, but they don't. They actually use hydrogen in a chemical reaction, what's called a fuel cell, to cause to create electricity and drive an electric motor. So that's why they're called an electric EV or an EV, because they're a fuel cell. However, the hydrogen fuel cell will not take very kindly to acceleration and quick acceleration. So that's what you have a battery there for. So if you put your foot down, the battery provides that oomph. And also the fuel cell doesn't regenerate hydrogen when you are trying to back off and regenerative braking. So the regenerative braking also goes into electric motor. So they have to have a battery, although it's again a small one like a hybrid. And they refuel like a petrol car with a hydrogen tank, hence the red there. So I'll put an exam on at the end, so anybody that wasn't listening, you'll have to come back to this slide. By the way, I put this my email address at the end of the slides. So if you want to email me and get a copy of these slides, you're most welcome. Anyway, a bit more terminology is EVSE. You hear that flung around a lot, electric vehicle supply equipment. It's basically what everyone calls now a car charger. I tried to point out that the AC ones are merely just an automatic power point, and the charger itself that changes the power, the electricity from AC from the household supply through to DC to feed the battery is actually built into the car, but I give up, so I'm now calling them chargers as well. You can have basically type 2 EVSEs or type 2 charger. There's a portable one, and that's the one on the left there, and that'll do up to 3-phase charging, depending on the car and depending on the setting and depending on what it's plugged into. But that's a type 2 EVSE, and that's sort of the portable one you can carry in your boot. The one in the middle there is a type 3 EVSE or type 3 car charger, and it actually has a socket there, and you carry just a lead with a plug on each end. And they're more robust plugs than a 3-pin power point, so they will actually last a lot better. They're built for up to 10,000 plugging and unplugging events, so they will last a lot more robust. And I always recommend, if you're putting in a charger at home, you put in these mode 3 or the permanent chargers, because they are just far better lasting and will give you a higher current than a power point. And third one along is your typical Tesla destination charger or home charger, and they have what's called a tethered lead, so it's actually part of the charger. If you're putting a charger in at home, by the way, I always recommend put a tethered lead in, unless you really want to have the nicer looks of the socket type one, because it's very annoying. I actually have a socket one at the moment I'm experimenting with, and I actually find it quite annoying to have to actually roll the lead up and plonk it back inside the house, as opposed to leave it curled up around the charger. Anyway, they're your AC ones on the left, and on the right, they're your fast charge ones. Now, those ones on the left, the AC ones, are what you use at home, or if you're just topping up around the place, just you're doing a short trip and you forgot to do a charge and you want to just top up at a friend's PowerPoint while you're having lunch, or your AC ones are fine. So DC ones are the ones that you use on the highway, and they'll be the ones that are actually being rolled out from basically Melbourne to Cairns across to Adelaide, and there's quite a whole network going in now. And these ones will charge at anything from 50 kilowatt hours through to 350 kilowatts to 350 kilowatts. So I'll talk a bit more about the speeds on the next slide. But basically, if you're driving up the highway and you want to stop after 2-3 hours driving, which I've often done to Melbourne to Sydney, Melbourne to Canberra, or Melbourne to Coffs Harbour, or even inland. I've done trips from Coffs Harbour through Tamworth to Dubbo and then back down, and that was a 2-day trip using those types of chargers. It's no more hard than an ICE, internal combustion engine car now, if you've got the network of those DC chargers along the way. So those ones are there. And the next slide, I said, yes, again, you probably want to detail these slides a bit better or look at them in your own time, but basically this will give you an idea of how quick it is to charge an EV on the fly. So at home on your AC, you don't really care how long it charges because basically you plug it in when you get home like a mobile phone and it's ready waiting for you to go the next day. And that's the beauty of it. You don't have to go and find the petrol station, pull up, wait for someone to go away, get into the particular 91, 95 diesel, whatever it is that you're trying to find, then stand there being a pump attendant waiting for it to fill and then go and pay for it and then get back on the road. You just plug in when you get home and then unplug. So I always say charging takes me about 20 seconds because it takes me about 10 seconds to plug it in and 10 seconds to unplug it the next morning. On the highway, there's those ones down the bottom. Those fellas will give you, it's a 50 and a 350 I'm showing there. If you look at the third column along, that will give you some idea of how many kilometers charged per hour you'll get. So if you plug into a 10 amp power point, just your ordinary household power point, you'll get about 16 kilometers. For the average EV, you get about 16 kilometers charged per hour. Whereas if you're plugging into a 350 kilowatt charger, you'll get on the next generation of EVs, because there's none, and the Porsche Taycan will do it at the moment, but there's some catching up. The Teslas will do 250 kilowatts. When they reach 350 kilowatt charging, they'll do 1,600 kilometers, up to 80% of the time, and then they slow down a bit after that. It's a function of the battery charging. So you can see by the time the next generation of EVs, you're only doing probably 10% or less of your charging on the highway. 90% of it's your 20 seconds at home plugging and unplugging. And you'll stop for about, with your 350 kilowatts, maybe 10 minutes for a toilet and coffee stop. I would stop for about 20, 25 minutes generally with the Kona if I'm heading up to Sydney. And it gives me a coffee break, toilet stop, walk around the car. It really doesn't slow me down in comparison to taking a petrol car anymore. And there's a few details on the left there that I've just sort of explaining the basics of the different types of cars and their charging. The main thing is it's not a one size fits all anymore. You just charge where and when it suits you. Anyway, so that's a quick thing on how fast you can charge. And the last slide I'll do before I actually start on the options are just to remind people it's not just cars. It's actually trucks. The one at the top right there is actually an SEA truck. They're doing new conversions of trucks and they're setting up in South Gippsland. They're working out of Dandenong at the moment. The next one there are the two Tesla semis that are in trials at the moment, and when they can build enough batteries to keep all of their production going, they'll be rolling them out. So I think it's early next year they'll start actually delivering. There's bicycles. Probably a number of people here have electric bicycles. I've got one that I haven't actually been riding much lately, but I'm looking forward to the sunshine and getting out. There's motorbikes. There's a number of motorbikes available that you can get now, and there's more coming. Harley have just brought out I can't quite think of its name. There's an article on in the AVA newsletter on that one. It's just a first test drive in it. There's planes. Yes, you can actually buy an electric plane. That's the Pipistrel Alpha. They're a training plane. There's a company in Perth that are selling them. There's also another company setting up in South Australia to assemble them, import and assemble them and sell them and use them as trainers. There's flying cars. That's a one-person vehicle that flies, and they're actually licensed for sale in America now. It's not yet autonomous, but the ultimate plan is for those to be autonomous, and that's a vertical takeoff and landing. And that one's called the Black Fly, if you want to look up some interesting videos of that are actually on its flights. Got autonomous form. That little thing down on the right-hand corner there is built by a company called AEV here in Melbourne, and that's a experimental autonomous that actually exists and is driving around in trials. There are electric buses. Shenzhen, I think in China, have actually changed over their entire fleet of 10,000 buses to full electric. So they're coming. We're a bit slower here in Australia, but they're definitely coming. And last but not least, electric ferries. There's a number of them around, and that's a full electric ferry. I think it carries a 42 megawatt hour battery and does a run from, I think it carries about 30 cars and 200 passengers. And there's a fleet of those being rolled out at the moment. There's one in particular that we talked about at the 2020 EV Vision Conference in November. I'll talk about that more later, but there's a report on the first 12 months operation. Spoiler alert, it is even better than you could possibly think. Okay, so coming to what is available in terms of cars. Well, there's lots. And this is just a selection, by the way. And there's more coming. These are all either just out or coming in the next year or two. Unfortunately, not a lot of them have come to Australia. I'll quickly run through those ones. These are the 4, 8, 9, 10, 11 currently new available here. No, I haven't put the MG ZS in yet. That one's just coming up. That will be available very soon. I'll talk about that on the next slide. As you can see, the Teslas are still quite expensive. So you've got your quite expensive cars at the top, although they're getting cheaper. The MG ZS, when it arrives, will actually be 47 grand. The Leafs are getting cheaper, and I'll talk more about the Zoe in a moment. They're getting very cheap. So there's a reasonable selection, but not a huge number yet. You will be coming to see these ones very soon. I've basically put in the ones that are available within the next few months to 12 months. So the MG ZS, they should be, that some of the press cars have arrived and are being test driven, and they should be starting to be delivered within the next month or so, I believe. And they're the first batch of 100 are actually $47,000 on the road. They have a 40 kilowatt hour battery, I think nearly 100 kilowatt DC charging, etc. Audi e-trons due, I think it may have arrived or just be about to. The Model Y, there were some rumors it might get here before Christmas. I think COVID might have slowed that one down. Porsche Taycan has arrived. You can order one now if you've got the ready dollars, starting from $218,000. And next year we will hopefully see the Roadster 2.0. And there's also a couple of van versions. So the EV Automotive are importing what's called the EC11. That's a 1.75 ton van. I believe it's on a boat coming from China as we speak. And SEA, that company I mentioned that does truck conversions, they're also offering a commuter bus soon, roughly the same size and configuration. That EV Auto will also be both a van and a 12-seater bus. You can choose either of those. If you haven't got the readies for a new car, and that's probably not surprising, the price point at the moment for EVs is certainly above internal combustion engine, although the various predictions are that somewhere around 2024, the first EVs will start reaching the price parity of petrol cars. So somewhere around 2024, they say the SUVs will start reaching that equal point for an equal quality car. And then by 2028, all of the segments will have actually reached parity, which means the ones that hit 2024 will be cheaper, because ultimately EVs will be cheaper than an internal combustion engine car because they take less, there's only about 17 moving parts in a electric motor versus about 400 and something in your average petrol. And they take, sadly, about 30% less people to build them because they're a very simple car to assemble. But if you haven't got the readies yet, then you could always look at second-hand offerings. And there's a number there. And you'll notice I've added the Renault Zoe, because unfortunately Renault, although they are one of the biggest auto groups in the world, they're actually quite a niche player in Australia. And although the Renault Zoe is the best-selling EV in Europe, still outselling the Model 3, is a very popular car, they really struggle to sell them here and have recently just given up on them. The beauty of it, though, is instead of 54,000 on the road that they were advertised at, they're now advertising them at 37,000 on the road. And having just bought one for my partner, you can haggle and you will get maybe a bit more off that. They have a 40 kilowatt hour battery, so they'll do up to 250, 300 Ks range. So they're not too shabby on their range. The only detail with them is they don't do DC charging, but they will do up to 22 kilowatt AC charging. Renault sort of took a punt on which system will be the most likely in the early days and decided that AC charging was cheaper for rolling those systems out. So, however, the new the ZE50 Zoe, which is the ones that have here as ZE40s, the ZE50 actually has DC charging as an option now. So that's the one selling in Europe. As I say, the Tesla Model S's, you've got the Nissan Leafs that were Australian delivered. Notice I say Australian delivered. The next slide, I'll talk about private importing. The Gen 1s, they had 24 kilowatt hours, and I had one of those for about 5 years. It was down to about 90 to 100 Ks in summer and about 80, 85 in winter. The batteries are slowly declining on those. They had an early generation battery and a few other details that they do degrade faster than most others, but they're still hanging in there. And I'll talk a little more about that in the next slide. Mitsubishi i-MiEVs, you can pick them up for 10 to 15 sort of range now, and their batteries are holding up quite well. 2015 to the current i3s, they have actually offered them in 3 different size batteries, 22, 33, and now currently 40. And some of the earlier ones also had the range extender. One issue to watch out with if you're looking at one of those is up to 2018, they had a different DC plug. I could talk more about that one, but basically the world has standardized on what's called CCS charging, and for countries, Europe, Australia, anywhere that's got a 240 volt system, it's CCS2. And unfortunately, BMW went with CCS1. So the early ones aren't compatible with the chargers in Australia, unlike the Leafs, even though they've got a different plug, which only the Nissan Leaf uses, now, which is chatter mode. They are being rolled out on all the DC fast chargers, so it's not an issue and won't be for some time. So their plug's okay, but unfortunately the BMW i3s aren't. And as I've also pointed out, the 2018-19 Ioniq with the 28 kilowatt hour battery, some of those are coming out and you can pick them up for under 40 grand now. And they have quite a reasonable range, quite an efficient EV. You can also, there are a number of people privately importing, and there are the odd mass conversion that were done. The MEV mini cab, a little Japanese thing, they're based on an iMEV. Some people are bringing those in. You can pick them up for a bit less than 15. Some of them did have very small batteries, so be careful there. You can import a number of different models of Nissan Leaf. They are brought in either privately, there's a couple of companies doing that. They're privately importing and they bring them in amongst all the other petrol cars, and they bring a bit of a sideline of EVs. And they bring in the Gen 1s, the Gen 1As that are up to 30 kilowatt hours, the ZE1s, which is what's available here with 40 kilowatt hour. And some people are bringing in the ZE1E Plus, which sadly, Nissan in its wisdom didn't bring here. It's a 63 kilowatt hour one. It would be a beautiful competitor to the Tesla Model 3 and to the Hyundai Kona. Unfortunately, they chose not to, so we only get the 40 kilowatt hour one, but there are some private imports of them. The other deal with those ones is a company called the Good Car Company. They're doing bulk buys of them, and as part of that bulk buy, they're also setting up local mechanics to be able to work on them, because that is one of the deals with what are called grey imports, because they didn't come in through the Australian dealer network. The dealers won't generally touch them, so they need to be brought in and have some sort of service. And also when they're brought in, they leave their new car warranty behind. So if you've got a recent second-hand one, the new car warranty stayed in Japan. They will not be warranted here. The Nissan ENV van, so another one, there's a number of models that were done overseas that weren't brought here. It's basically a Leaf in drag, and they are around 28,000, and the Good Car Company will bring those in as well. And there was also a company called Blade, and they were converting Hyundai Getzers from new. There's a number, about 50 of them were done. They're not for the faint-hearted. Basically, if you like working on cars yourself and want an EV, a cheap EV to start with, it's fine, but don't expect them to be reliable. The only problem with them was because he was on a low budget, it was a small business here in Victoria, he basically treated them all as individual prototypes, so there's no two different. I think that's the reason I gave up working on EVs, was those, because I had post-traumatic stress disorder, because every time one turned up, it would be different to the previous one, and I'd have to start all over again working out how it went together. Anyway, so if you're a tinkerer and like them, they're not to be sneezed at. I can also talk about why EVs benefit. So we've gone from what's available to why they benefit the environment, and to the environment side of it, no tailpipe pollution. So certainly less asthma, less pollution of the cities themselves. Reduced overall emissions, I'll talk more about that on the next slide. The negligible emissions if you plug in them into solar or wind or have green power as an option. You can reduce your wasted coolants. Most of them do have coolant systems for the batteries and the electronics, but there's certainly a lot less wastage than in a motor vehicle. There's certainly no oils apart from the gear oil that's pretty much sealed for life. Brake pads, because of regenerative braking, virtually never wear out these days. Certainly no plugs, oil filters or air filters, that type of thing. Yes, as some people point out, there's ethical sourcing, in particular of cobalt in the Congo, but there's many other products that, if you just think of I'm trying to think of that part of New Guinea that had basically a civil insurrection over the mining practices of the company there and shut it down, and a number of other companies you can think of for all sorts of mining. So it's an issue with mining in general. So I'm not quite sure whether EVs can be blamed for all of the world's mining woes. And for you, by the way, you can save lots on your reduced service costs. Electricity is certainly cheaper than petrol. If you're running on just grid power, overnight charge, probably a quarter the price of petrol for the same distance. Day rates, probably a third. Even on the highway, it's still 2/3 of the price of petrol when you're using those DC fast chargers. And if you're on the right tariff, or if you're using your own solar grid connect type stuff, fuel may effectively be free. And coming back to that, this is my Craig Kelly, please check your figures before opening your mouse slide. In Australia, if you plug into the grid, pretty much in every state of Australia, you will put out less emissions per 10,000 kilometres. So on your right is 2 grey columns, which is a 2017 Corolla on city or combined cycle, and 10,000 Ks for a 2017 Corolla, you put out roughly 2 tonnes of carbon emissions. For a equivalent BMW i3, you would be putting out 1/4 of a tonne in Tasmania, because they're mostly hydro. In South Australia, that's 50% or more renewable energy. You're only putting 0.8 out. Even in Victoria, where they are particularly dirty, although it is improving slowly, particularly dirty brown coal, it's 1.64 tonnes. The only situation in the whole of Australia is where you're slightly worse off running on the grid alone is if you are like me, run a electric vehicle for all of your combined city and country driving, in which case you're about 5.6% worse off. That does assume you don't use solar panels, don't subscribe to green power. So yes, EVs, even on the grid, will reduce your emissions overall, as well as reduce your local emissions around your neighbourhood. Okay, why they benefit the environment, I've just mentioned there, and what are my savings is the next one. I've just picked the Renault Zoe as a number. Their figure is 133 watt-hours per kilometre, or 13.3 kilowatt-hours per 100 kilometres. That seems to be becoming the standard figure these days. It's kilowatt-hours per 100. So if you drive over 10,000 kilometres a year, like I showed for that last slide, using an off-peak tariff, there's, again, relatively rubber numbers because it's individual circumstances, but you can plug your own numbers in and see what you do. Your EV for that distance on off-peak will give you $330. So it'll add $332 to your electricity bill, and you'll save $1,200 in petrol bill. So you're well off better there. And the savings on my Kona, for instance, is $160 every year, or 15,000 kilometres, one service. And that's pretty much just a safety check and an update of the maps. And that's all it is. Whereas a lot of cars are still 6 monthly services, starting off, relatively cheaper than getting up to $300-400 if you're getting into timing belts, 800 or more. So for the life of the car, you're basically paying for an EV, $160 odd. So each year you're saving $1,100-1,200, and that's per 10,000 Ks. Okay, I won't dwell too much on this slide, although the basically is when to consider moving to an EV. And I just basically put up a set of criteria. So I'll leave that slide for people to either read off their computer screens at the moment or send me a request to send in the slides. There's also an article, as you'll see down there, I've circled. I've written that for the Driven, I think it was August last year, so it's probably almost due to an update. It's what the what, when, why guide, and I've actually put all these slides in and a description, and I'll pretty much due for an update. But if you're traveling less than 50 kilometres per day, and the average Melbourne commute, by the way, is around 30, any EV on the market at any price point that you wish will do that. If you're traveling less than 140 Ks, pretty much most things will. The current Leaf would comfortably fit in there. The older Leaf would start falling out. I'll talk about secondhand a bit later. Like this is all the new ones at the moment. If you're doing less than 200, everything bar the Kangoo would still comfortably do it. If you're traveling 300, then you're starting to push the friendship with a couple of them. The Ioniq EV 28 kilowatt hour, I should update this actually, that's still on the 28. The 38 kilowatt hour battery would still comfortably do, or would just squeak in on the 300. As would the Nissan Leaf, is probably starting to stretch the friendship on that. If you're wanting to do interstate distance traveling and the superchargers, we're using a Tesla, easy as on the Teslas. The detail with that is the Tesla supercharger, which is a DC charging network, is not an open network. Only Teslas can use that. So just a reminder, if you're driving any other car, even though it has DC fast charging, you can't use a Tesla charger. Annoyingly, the Teslas can actually use all the public ones. So they get both ends of the benefit, I suppose you could say. Some of them tow, although that's probably not been high on the priority list of the manufacturers. There's certainly Tesla X has about a 2.25 tonne, I think. The Tesla Model 3 is a 910 kilo rating. Kangoo ZE's got 300 odd. Jaguar I-Pace has a 700. The Kona, you didn't hear this from me, but the petrol tow bar does bolt straight on, even though they didn't rate the electric for it. And I've had a few notes down the bottom about that one. If you're not available or not wanting to buy new, then you could look at used. And I've looked at basically the same sort of criteria for used as well, so I won't talk too much to that slide. The main deal with that is that pretty much, even if you're doing just 30, 50 Ks a day, all of the current second-hand EVs would comfortably do it. And if you're keeping under a budget of even under 20,000, you can pick up a Leaf, an iMEV, or the odd ENV van you probably might pick. It's only under 30. Oop, what have I done? There we go. Okay, practicalities. When to consider an EV, there's a few practicalities. You may come across an issue if you've got an old switchboard. So if your house is older than 20 years old, you may have a switchboard like that. Pretty much they are impossible to add things to. So the best deal is you put a new switchboard in. So the EV, it's not the EV's fault that you're putting a new switchboard in, but it's sort of been a trigger point for something that perhaps should have been done some time ago. If it's more than, and I also have written an article in Renew, or if for those are EVA members, issue 231 was reprinted in on a greater detail and depth on that. Oops, I'll just back up a bit. A little more on that one is if your house is more than about 30 years old, actually, yes, would be about 30 years old, your power supply may only be 32 amps into the house, which means if you put in a 32 amp charger or 7 kilowatt charger, you can charge the car, but don't turn on the toaster or even a light. So you may need to have your power upgraded. So many houses will have 64 amp supply. So like here, I can plug in my 7 kilowatt charger and no issues. But if I had a 32 kilowatt or 32 amp supply, then I would have to get a upgrade. So putting in an EV may trigger a few wiring issues. Just to be warned, if you've got a mate that's an electrician, get them to come around and just have a quick assess, or read that article, and that gives you a rough idea of the sort of practicalities and what you may be up for with your house. Do you have somewhere off the street to charge? If you're charging on the street, you're not really supposed to run a lead across the footpath. Dangling into a tree is a little bit safer. Strata title homes, again, I've put articles in Renew. There's a number of articles there. I'd say 145, I think there's 146 or 7 as well on strata title. And there's even some charging options starting to pop up, literally pop up in the streets, and I've written about that. And there's possibly more on a trial here in Melbourne, but that's still in development. Beware, by the way, of selecting appropriate electricity tariff. There is an article on that, I think, yes, edition 144. And basically the deal is if you've got a day rate, shoulder rate, night rate, it is certainly a lot cheaper to charge at night. I'm one of those lucky bastards that has the 70 cent per kilowatt premium feed-in tariff. So I try to charge overnight at my off-peak rate and not try and suck my 72 cents worth of charge into the car during a day. I'd rather pump it into the grid. Until recently, I had not paid an electricity bill in 12 years. It's even running electric cars for about the last 8 or 9. And that was mainly because I'd started an off-peak rate during the weekends. I just changed my tariff structure, and I was plugging in and charging during the day, and I forgot about my 72 cents a kilowatt. I wasn't feeding it on weekends, and suddenly had a bill for $26, which after, probably all of you are laughing at me at the moment, but it hurt paying $26 bill after 12 years of basically getting a check for $100, $200 a year every year. That ends, by the way, in 2024, and I joined the rest of the world in putting a bigger solar panel system in there. You may need to buy extra adapters and leads to use public EVSEs. I remember I mentioned a little bit earlier about the BYO leads and just a socket, and that charger that's on the wall there, that is a BYO, sorry, that's a tethered lead one, which I put in originally, and I'm experimenting one with a socket at the moment. And as I said, I'm wishing to go back to a tethered lead as soon as I possibly can, because it's annoying me putting that lead away. So I always recommend using a tethered lead for home. But if you're using public chargers, the councils do prefer to put BYO leads type EVSEs in, simply because they don't have to look after the leads. It's safer. The leads often get left lying on the ground, they're finding, in other places in the world, and they get driven over or damaged. So there's a whole lot of safety issues. It's much better if you have your own lead and you can trust it. It's also useful to carry a higher power EVSE. Most cars except the Zoe come with a portable charger that will plug into a power point. There's a little bit of history as to why the Zoe doesn't. I'll answer questions if people want to ask that one in the Q&A at the end. But you also have the option, if you can buy ones like that one there, which actually is switchable, anything from 6 amps, or that's 1.4 kilowatts, up to 22 kilowatts, because Zoe will do up to 22 kilowatts. A Tesla or the BMWs will do 11, and there's one or two others that do 11. 7 kilowatts is the maximum for a Kona, but you can switch those ones, and they're quite handy, so you can plug into any power point anywhere. If you're traveling around the countryside and just stopping at caravan parks, one that'll do 15 amps is brilliant. You can actually, my Kona, when I was traveling around Victoria, when I call it the EV long weekend, that was the, if you remember the last federal election, when Michaelia Cash foolishly said EVs will ruin the long weekend because you can't get very far, I went challenge accepted. And was it Michaelia Cash or our esteemed Prime Minister? One of the two, anyway. So I went challenge accepted, and I did 7 days, 2,400 kilometres around Victoria in my Kona. Deliberately didn't choose to do DC charging, partly because there weren't any on that route. There's some going in now. But the deal was I just plugged in to caravan park chargers or caravan outlets overnight, and I had a 3.6 kilowatt portable charger. So if I plugged in when I got in there at 4, 5, 6 in the evening, by 8, 9 in the morning, I was ready to go 100% charged. EVs and caravan parks are a marriage made in heaven. There is, of course, the deal that when you consider an EV, you get no option at all. There are a number of legislated bans of the sales of new internal combustion engine cars, as I mentioned at the start. Hybrid electric vehicles, your Toyota Priuses and things like that, the early ones, will also fall under the ICE bans. So Costa Rica, funnily enough, and next year, Norway, which has now reached past, in fact, 60% plug-in vehicles, and 50%, so half the new car sales are full battery electric vehicles, is 2025. So they're well on the way. And they've actually set a date of 2040 for all short-haul flights must be electric. As I mentioned earlier, there are actually electric planes, and there's more coming. Denmark's 2030, India's 2030. So we're starting to get into countries with, when it comes to India or France or the UK, that actually have car industries, and they're setting dates. And you'll notice at the bottom, I've got the UK, England, Wales, Northern Ireland 2040, and Scotland's 2032 now. They've finished that. They moved it to 2035 not so long ago, and they're actually starting to talk about not 2035, but 2032. So that's the sort of deal that's going to happen. The rest of the world will stop making them. So we'll either have to change to EV or start importing old internal combustion engine vehicles and keep fixing them up, much like what was that country in Havana, Cuba, yes, that had all those 50s cars and kept them on the roads forever because they weren't allowed to import any. We may turn up being having the Cuba of the South Pacific if we're not careful. We better start moving to EVs at some stage. If you want to find out more about EVs, and I would highly recommend joining the Australian Electric Vehicle Association. I'm the Victorian Vice Chair, and I'm also the National Newsletter editor. It doesn't cost a lot. It's $50 an individual, $25 for concession, or if you're a small business owner, something like that, it's only $125. For that, you get a quarterly newsletter. The last one just went out, had 74 pages of EV information and views and news, and various people sharing their tips and ideas and their own personal trip stories on where they went and how they actually charge their cars, and basically showing how easy it is to run an EV these days. If you're looking at comparing EVs on the market, there is on the website, ava.asn.au, go to the fact sheets and you can get a list of all the current battery electric vehicles on the market now, as well as all of the, there's a one-page listing of the prices, battery sizes and ranges of all the BEVs and PHEVs, and that's updated monthly. So it's first of this month. Actually, looks like I'm just about due to update that one again. I actually maintain that list. And they're done to a 2-page format, so they're all exactly the same heading, so you can easily compare models. While I think of it, the 2020 EV Vision e-conference. Every year we at AEVA run a expo conference that goes from state to state. And this year was to be Victoria, and COVID put a wrecking ball through the first version, which was to be quite a big event at the Melbourne Showgrounds. It was to be a one-day, about 300-person conference and evening awards night and dinner and 2-day expo and try-drive sessions. And we were expecting roughly 10,000 people per day for the expo side part of the Saturday, Sunday. It was to be the weekend directly after the Melbourne show. And as you may have guessed, it didn't happen. So the first wrecking ball went through that one. We then went to setting up an online version, and we couldn't find a provider. So we didn't just move the original conference online. We then had to pare it back. And then we found a provider. So we actually managed to rebuild, and we now have an even bigger conference than was originally planned at the very first event. So we have basically there's 8 sessions running, it'll be 3 streams over 6 themes. As you can see those themes on the right there. We have over 40 speakers. Tim Flannery, the environmentalist, is doing the keynote speech. The Victorian Minister for the Environment is doing the opening. We have, I think it's people from 8 different time zones, international time zones, talking at various times. As I say to a few people, try keeping 8 different time zones in your head when you're trying to set up the program, as I was swapping emails around the world. But we got there, and it's now things like leaders and followers. We'll have a number of speakers from different electric vehicle associations around the world sharing their experiences and what we can look forward to and things that we should and should not do here. We'll have speakers from various companies around the world. We have Sandvik talking on their underground mining machinery. We have a speaker from Norway, I think it is, or Denmark, I can't remember which, who's going to talk on the first year of the running of the e-ferry Ellen. We have a number of speakers on EV charging on both AC and DC. The setup of this session, by the way, is part conference and as in the old style, and part webinars. So they're 1-hour blocks with 15-minute gaps between, so you can zip out, make yourself a cup of coffee and things like that. And there's 3 speakers per block and a written Q&A at the end. We also have the EV hacker, so there's people who like to DIY their own stuff, or they want to look at importing those grey vehicles that I talked about earlier. There's speakers from there on upgrading the Leaf batteries, things like that. EV charging on both the AC and DC sides. On 2 wheels is your bicycles and your motorcycles. And then the plenary will have, at the end, we'll actually have Robert Llewellyn speaking as part of Robert Llewellyn, for those who don't know, is the Fully Charged website. I would highly recommend going there. For those who are wondering, that name rings a bell. He was Crichton on Red Dwarf, but he does a very good EV show now. Anyway, the plenary session will have Robert Llewellyn, we'll have Tim Flannery, we'll have a couple of Electric Vehicle Association members, heads from around the world, as well as our own president from AVA here, and talking about how to go forward. And Behad Jafari from the Electric Vehicle Council will be there too, and that'll be moderated by Giles Parkinson from the Driven website. And that'll be basically a roundtable discussion of, from what we've learned during that day, how do we move the EV transition forward here in Australia? So if you go to ava.delegateconnect.co, you'll be able to register for that conference. Yes, I think we've reached the burning question time. I'll unshare my screen and go back to John, and we start looking at answering some questions.
Right. I think we can still see you, my friend. So
yes, what are you going to ask in questions?
Okay. So first of all, thank you for an extraordinarily knowledgeable and detailed presentation. Thank you very much. I think I've got all the questions that have come through. I dipped out for a technical problem partway through this, so if I've missed anybody, please just use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to re-enter your question, or if there's new questions coming forward, please just use them. Bryce, there were a number of questions relating to the Tesla, things like, when are we going to be able to connect it to our batteries in our houses? What's the trend likely to be with prices on Teslas? Basically, I suppose, why people are raving about Teslas in the way they are so often.
Look, Tesla basically has been Elon Musk has been the person it's pushed the EV revolution. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have all these other electric cars. I'm pretty certain of that. Or they would be just trickling out like the GM EV1 and sort of put them out and tow in the water and then pull them all back again. Whereas Tesla's really pushed the point, and he builds brilliant cars. There's no 2 ways about it. They are really, really good cars, and certainly in many ways ahead of the pack in a lot of the technology, although some of them are catching up. You know, I was actually one of the people that put a deposit down for the Model 3 when they first, on the day I sort of lined up, I thought that the specs sounded brilliant. Unfortunately, as the specs were fully detailed, I started looking at it going, it's just not quite the car for me. And I ended up going for the car in the background here, the Kona. It's actually for bang for buck, I couldn't go past it. One of the deals was I wanted a hatch, and the Model 3 is a sedan. I wanted a dashboard in front of me. I'm a bit old-fashioned that way. I didn't like the idea of the center screen. The people that own them quite love the center screen, but it drives me nuts. So I wanted a more old-fashioned binnacle in front of myself, and a number of other sort of things that suited me. And to match that, Tesla Standard Range Plus had a smaller battery than that, so I would have had to do what I wanted to do, which is go interstate and comfortably do that in the same way I used to with my petrol car. Means I needed something over 60 kilowatt hours in battery, and the Kona had that, and the only one after that was the long range Tesla, which is 95,000. So I paid 64 for that. I really didn't want to stretch another 30 grand to get the sort of car that I needed. So Tesla technology is brilliant there.
Yeah, I'll bet you didn't. Batteries, of course, always come up in these things. There have been a number of questions about average battery pack life and roughly how much it costs to do the changeover.
Multiple answers to that. Average battery pack life is 8 to 10 years until they don't die. They don't just drop dead one day like a electric razor battery. They will actually just slowly fade, and eventually the range is not quite what you want. My old Leaf was still down to, as I said, 85 to 100 Ks, and it came when I first got it about 130, 140. And the people I sold it to will probably keep it going for another few years. So it will end up being probably 10, 11 years old, that battery, before it's pulled out. And even that battery then can be reused in storage systems and what have you for another 10 years of life. So you'll get 20 years of life out of a battery. So don't sort of panic that they're a throwaway item and it will die in 3 or 4 years. That's not the case. You'll get comfortably. My Kona, if it lost 10, 15% of its range, it would still be quite comfortable after 8, 10 years with it. So I wouldn't really be fussing to replace it in a hurry. So that's one thing. And the costs for a Nissan Leaf, their current for a 24 kilowatt hour battery is about 10 grand now. And the Leaf's, the rest of the car is standing up so well, it's worth spending that sort of money to do them. But the price of batteries is coming down all the time. When the Leafs first came out, they were $32,000 for a replacement battery, but they did replace them under warranty because they did have issues. So I don't think anybody paid 32 grand, but that was the quoted price. So they're definitely coming down, and as the prices get cheaper, even it's a loaded question to say what they're going to be in 5 years' time. I know I went to a conference where SEA were talking, and they wouldn't give a price for 5 years, 8 years out for a replacement battery. They said the price is coming down so fast that you can't. So
okay, so
maybe $5 grand for an equivalent. I wouldn't put my life on it though.
Okay, but at the moment we could say, rule of thumb, about 10 grand.
Yep.
You mentioned the Kona a few times. Peter comments that he's heard issues concerning the Hyundai Kona and fires. Do you have any information about that?
Yep, there's been 13 fires around the world where people have fully charged them and left them plugged in, and they're still sorting out what it is. In America, they're doing a recall and basically changing the software that monitors it, and if necessary, replace the battery. But given that there's been 40,000 or more of them put out, and only 13 of them burnt, it's not a big issue, put it that way. It's not like what was that mobile phone that was going up in flames about every second one of them, so they pulled them all in. But the Konas, A, there's that. B, it's only if they're fully charged and left fully charged. So at the moment, I'm just leaving mine at 80%, which, given I live in Melbourne, I was running it at 60% until I've had to do a bit of running around recently. So it's not a big issue, but there is a recall. Hyundai Australia are sort of dithering a little bit, but the ones that, I think about 300 here that were definitely built in Korea were definitely built in the time frame. So there will be a recall, but it's not a big issue.
Okay. And on another particular brand, Natalie asks, why is it that the Zoe is not able to get an ANCAP rating?
They wouldn't be allowed to be sold here if they didn't.
Well, okay. So she's under a misapprehension.
I think so. Mm-hmm. It would have, and Renault, generally speaking, go for a very much pride themselves on very high safety ratings. So I would be surprised if it didn't have an ANCAP rating.
All right, that's something perhaps could be followed up.
I'll follow that one up. It might be that they brought so few of them in that they just went with the European rating, which is the same testing system.
Then there are a couple of questions. Catherine is one of the people who've asked. This question's focusing a bit on Nillumbik, to be a little bit parochial. Two sides to it. Do we have any information about when we might see some fast charging stations in the Shire?
Partly speak to your local council. Secondly, fast chargers, 90%-ish of your charging is done at home. So there isn't really an enormous need for those things behind me in suburban areas, because basically you can charge them at home or top them up while you're at work. It is handy to have a few of them around, and I know there's one in Altona. There's a few bobbing up. Certainly, as you're getting into the outer suburbs, it'd be nice to have a little bit of a smattering of them. And there's a number. The Central Victorian Greenhouse Alliance has started work on installing a series around Central Victoria. So it's partly get onto AVA and start pestering us to pester your council. Start pestering your council as well.
Okay. And the other side of thinking about Hurstbridge in particular, Catherine has pointed out that Hurstbridge is the home of Peter Brock, and we're close to wineries, amazing food, and so on. Businesses are interested. Putting on your vice president's hat, would you be interested in having an exhibition and driving possibilities of EVs?
Yes.
And as a show and tell?
Definitely, yes. It's just a matter of organisers, and we'll be there. Well, not quite yet. We can't go past 25 Ks, but as soon as we can, we'll be there, especially if it's a winery.
All right, Clean Energy Nillumbik to see if we can organise.
Yeah, we'd love to. As the weather's getting nice, we often would. So if you've got some sort of event out there, we can bring a table, or we'll just do a drive day and come out and talk.
Okay. And then there's a question from Paul about the longevity of electric motors as compared with the old internal combustion, which these days seems to quite faithfully do about between 250,000 and 500,000 K before it needs anything much in the way of major attention. What about electric?
There's very few moving parts apart from the bit in the middle, so you've basically got two bearings to worry about. So as far, they're last. Electric motors have been around for over 100 years, and some of those motors that were built then are still going. So electric motors are pretty robust things. So I suspect that they're going to last a lot better than ICE.
So following on from that, Ray's interested in whether converting your internal combustion to an electric vehicle is worth considering, or whether it doesn't stack up.
That's a really good question. And in the past, the only way to get an EV was to convert your own. These days, as I showed in the slide of the second-hand vehicles, they're getting quite cheap. And if you're doing a conversion, to do a good conversion with 150-ish kilometre range, you're going to spend 40 grand in parts, including the car, maybe more. If you want to get more range, you're going to start pushing 45 grand. If you want to get 200K range. For 45K, you could buy yourself a good Ionic, a good second-hand current model Leaf. So for day-to-day conversions, you wouldn't bother anymore. It's just financially mad. On the other hand, if you want to save a nice classic car, that's the future for conversions, is keep the old cars going. And like a lot of the old British cars, they'd be a damn sight more reliable.
Okay. You mentioned along the way, Wendy noticed, better batteries going into new vehicles in the next year or two. Could you just say a little bit more about that? I know you have talked about batteries, but...
Yes, there's a company in New Zealand called EVs Enhanced that's actually working on putting bigger batteries in Nissan Leaf, so repacking them with different cells, or putting the bigger, because the battery pack itself is the same shape and size, it just more energy dense, the later one. So they can actually put 30 kilowatt hour batteries into the 24 kilowatt hour Leafs and things. And they'll actually be talking at the 2020 EV Vision conference. There's a speaker from New Zealand talking about their batteries, and you can ask questions of them there. And the Good Car Company are, in fact, when they do those Leafs that they're bringing in from from Japan, they are setting up a deal that they can also, for about 12 grand, you can put in a new battery pack of a bigger size, I believe.
Now, we have amongst our attendants tonight a Zoom fan like me, Laurie asks, when will big companies like Lamborghini and Ferrari start making electric cars?
They are. The Lotus Evija, look that one up. Evija, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it. It's a beautiful looking thing and it's full electric. The AC Cobra have an AC Cobra now, and you can order one. They actually are building an electric Cobra. I think McLaren are building a hybrid at the moment. So yeah, some of them are starting to move across, and the others are. I can't remember. I have read about some of the others, but I can't actually name the names because I can't think of them off the top of my head, and I don't want to mislead people. But I know some of the other sports car manufacturers are actually looking at them.
Yeah, and I've certainly read various drive reviews which mention the almost frightening accelerating power of electric motors. So I don't think there's any lack of excitement in electric cars.
Oh no.
What about, though, before we go zooming too quickly around the road, what about insurance premiums for EVs? Are they more expensive? Paul was interested in knowing about that.
Also, a very good question. It depends, as usual, where you go. I had quotes for that Kona from highest was 1,500, lowest was 570 for comprehensive. You can guess which one I went for.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure. So it's just a matter of going around, and the same with the Zoe ensuring that. It's just some of them say, oh, their electric car will charge you heaps. It's just ring someone else. That's the short answer, and you will get a normal sort of price as any other car. It just depends on the company. Some of them seem to be just either trying to make hay while the sun shines or genuinely scared of them.
Yeah, okay. Now, you mentioned a few times during your presentation that you use your car for quite long trips. Michael was interested whether you need to drive an EV conservatively. So if you floor it, does it use the charge up at a much worse rate than doing it in a petrol car? And to give an example, is it practical to drive an EV from, say, Melbourne to Brisbane via the Newell Highway? Is it possible?
The Newell at the moment, you'll get about a third of the way up and then run out of charges. But if you then duck across to the New England, you'll get there. And you can go up the coast as well. And as far as caning it's concerned, they're a very efficient motor. The first trip I did up to Sydney, there were no charges after Albury till basically the outskirts of Sydney. So I had to go via Canberra because I didn't have enough charge to go Albury to Sydney. And I basically made sure I had 100% charge at Albury. And I wasn't sparing the horses. It was a cold winter's day when I was heading up. So I was sitting on 110, 115 all the way to Canberra with the heater flat out. So I wasn't worrying at all about that. And I came into Canberra, I only had 37 Ks left of range, but I was quite comfortable getting there.
Okay.
And then plugged it into a ordinary PowerPoint overnight where I was staying there because I caught up with a mate there, and then I was picking him up to go onto an EV conference in Sydney. And then we just popped in the morning to the DC charger to finish off the charge, and off we went.
Okay. Looking at the larger sustainability question, one of the questions that's come through is that we're all aware that there are limited petroleum reserves, but will the world run out of lithium quicker than we need?
No, there's lots of lithium. The only rare thing about rare earths is the word rare, because there's actually quite a lot of most of the rare earths around. They're called that because they're hard to find and extract, rather than there's not a lot of them. So there is plenty of lithium around, and there's just not a lot of lithium mines, but they're opening them up quick smart. And the other part of it is the lithium is recyclable. So those batteries, have probably a 20-year life, first in cars and then in standing storage. And I actually wrote an article for The Driven last week, was it early this week, on, I called it, Where Do Old Car Batteries Go to Die? And they literally go into standing storage, and there's some quite big systems going in England at the moment. And there's a 5 megawatt hour system going in at the Renault factory in France, or one of the factories in France. And they're actually putting in old Renault car batteries as well as new ones that are just storing away for aftermarket replacements and what have you. So they just get a gentle life, so they don't sort of sit around being damaged by being left unattended for years. So they get a gentle life being cycled as a backup power supply and stabilising the grid, like the Holbrook, the big battery in South Australia. And then they can just pop it out and put it into a Zoe, for instance, when it's needed. So they've made them and they've got them sitting there for the backups up to they're supposed to support cars for up to 10 years. So they're just sitting there.
Rhoda wanted to follow through your comments about the kind of chargers to have at home. What's the cost for a fast charger to be installed in your home, say a 7 kilowatt one, for example?
For the charger itself is starting from around 700-ish, and then similar for the installation. So, for a very basic installation near the switchboard, 1,500 for the basic charger and a basic setup. Depends if you've got a really awkward solid brick 2-story house. It's hard to, there's no cavity, and also it's like putting in a PowerPoint in a solid brick house versus a weatherboard. It can be either very easy or very hard. So the basic price starts at around 1,400-ish up.
Okay.
Mind you, if you're putting in a 15 amp outlet, the outlet's $50 worth, and so subtract $700 off that. So you're looking at 600-ish, 700-ish for putting in a 15 amp outlet. Because the key with EV charging is it must go straight back to the switchboard, and it must have a particular type of circuit breaker, not an ordinary one.
Okay, doke. Now, you've mentioned SUVs a few times. Are the Toyota RAV4 EVs no longer coming to Australia? Megan was interested in them.
As in the plug-in hybrid or the hybrid?
Well,
I don't know. I don't know a lot about them. I know that there's some talk about them, but I honestly don't know.
Okay. Might be something, Megan, you have to follow through with Toyota Australia. I guess it'll be on their website.
If there is a plug-in version, it'll be on that list on the AVA website. It's a bit hard for me to keep my head around all of them, so I tend not to keep a bigger track of the plug-in hybrids.
Ray asks an interesting question. We all pay quite a lot of tax on our internal combustion motors. Do you have any views on whether or not, or how the government is going to be raising revenue from EV drivers as they become more numerous?
We at AVA say we have no problem with some sort of road user tax to replace the petrol, but they're not mutually exclusive. It should be the petrol car people then should have an extra tax put on them for the pollution and the carbon damage that they're doing to the environment. So quite happy to have that. You're still saving in terms of the environment anyway. So even if it was the same cost as petrol in the end to run them, and the government was taking a cut on it, is it a great deal? We have a position paper from the AVA. You can look at our website and read it, but we have no objection to it so long as it's fair, so long as it actually applies to petrol and electric vehicles alike. And petrol cars actually start paying their way more than they are now for the damage they're doing to our health and our environment.
And I seem to recall, Bryce, that there's quite a lot of talk from this context about being able to use GPS systems in cars in order to have discretionary pricing for going in at peak hours or slack hours, going to the CBD or merely tootling around the suburbs, and having something that's much more flexible than the present excise on petrol.
Yep,
so,
in England, the plug-in hybrids actually react to, there's a couple of models of plug-in hybrid in England now that react to geofencing because they have congestion charges for diesel, petrol cars, and they're free for low emission vehicles like electric cars. So to get the plug-in hybrids to fit into that category, they have a function where the geofence that as soon as they reach that higher taxing rate, they'll send a signal out, or if they're driving around, they're registered as a plug-in hybrid, they actually switch to electric only within that geofenced area.
Okay. Jill is keen to go, but she wants to know, is there a small electric car that she can afford, say, under 30K?
New ones, no, but they're getting, if you can stretch to a few K over 30, she could get a Zoe now.
Were the mid-30s, weren't they?
Yes. So if she stretched a few more Ks, a few more $1,000, you could get a brand new Zoe.
Okay. Or
at the moment, nothing else. That is the cheapest around at the moment. The MGZS, which is a 40 kilowatt hour battery, they'll be 47 when they come out. If you're waiting another year or so, some of the early Ionics with a 28 kilowatt hour battery will probably start sneaking in under 30. Although we're finding that battery electric vehicles hold their values quite well because there's not a lot of them around, and there's a lot of people want them, strange enough, like this lady's talking.
What about if Jill goes second hand?
Yep, so at the moment, second hand, and or stretch a little to a Zoe at the moment.
Okay. And what would be the sort of options for second hand? I know you mentioned them earlier, but
Yep. Yeah, send me if she sends an email for the slides. I'm happy to forward them, and it's got the list. Or have a look at the website. Yeah, probably I can send her the slides. But options would be depends on what range she wants. So if she wants something more than 100 k's, then she'd have to wait for an Ioniq to dip under there.
Okay. Where are we on the developmental curve, so to speak? Are we likely to see dramatic improvements in the capacity, range, cost, whatever, of EVs over the next couple of years? In other words, are we in a position where if we're thinking of getting an EV, we should jump now, or should we wait for a couple of years? It's a bit like the question about getting batteries for your house. At the moment, the advice from review is just hang fire for a little while longer. What about for EVs?
I think EVs are basically reaching that sort of, if you look at a curve that starts like that and goes up, the original Leafs and things are sort of down there. My Kona and things I'm saying are roughly about there. They will keep improving, but it's a incremental point now. We're really reaching that point. So that car there will match a petrol car, and anything after that is just getting better and better. So if you're buying, say, 100 kilowatt hour charging, say 100 kilowatt charging, you're getting your times down to 20, 30 minutes at a petrol station instead of 30, 40, which I do at the moment. I was on a petrol station on those roadhouse type trips. So you're just getting better and better. For the Teslas on that table there, I think they're getting down to 15, 20 minutes.
Pretty impressive. So there's been a lot of talk about the technology.
Sorry, I was going to say for range, battery range as well. So if you're getting nearly 500 Ks on the out of I think I get more than 500 Ks out of the Kona around town and around 420 to 460 on the highway. Again, it's equal to petrol. So anything after that is incrementally better. So what I'm saying is I really do think they have reached that point of it's just waiting on price if you're waiting on price. And when you can afford one, then the technology is not going to incredibly change like it has in the last 5 years.
Okie doke. Now, in Nillumbik, a lot of us do a little bit of towing of one thing and another. EV and tow bars, please.
Yes, that's a good question. And if you look at the BEV-FEV list on the AVA website, I actually have a list of what the tow ratings are of all the BEVs and FEVs on the market are at the moment. Only the Model 3, the Model X, and the Kangoo have tow rating. Only Jag, I believe, has a tow rating as well. Off the record, for the Konas, the tow bar bolts straight on off a petrol one, and I've actually got one on mine.
Okay.
But so, I'm conservative in towing with it.
Okay, so a horse float, maybe not, but a light trailer with some rubbish for the tip, maybe yes.
Yes, or if you had a Model X or 3, a light trailer to the tip would be fine. I would only tow a small tool trailer, things like that, sort of maximum probably 500 kilograms with my Kona. I know other people that tow small caravans with their Konas very happily. They have more power and no issues with it, but it's not recommended. Hyundai don't recommend it. They don't say don't do it. They just say not recommended. And they say if you have a warranty claim related to it, they won't cover it. But so it's a little bit treading warily with towing anything large with a Kona. But as I said, I'm comfortable towing small loads with it. Because other people will tow bigger.
The bodywork, the structural arrangements of the car are much the same as for a petrol one, so it's not.
Yeah, the tow bar bolted straight on in exactly the same mounting points.
You talked a lot about technology and practicalities and things. There are a couple of questions about the sentimental side. People enjoy driving. What is it that you or that your friends really enjoy about having an EV?
They're very smooth, very quiet. That's one of the beauty. So you actually find it's just you don't miss that vibration. You don't realize it's there until you've been driving an EV for a while and get back in a petrol car. Even a smooth petrol car seems sort of rough and shaky after that. So the smoothness and quietness and the much greater power, that the electric Kona, for instance, is more powerful than the petrol equivalent. And the Tesla Model 3s are certainly a lot more performance oriented than any petrol car that's on the market as a pedestrian day-to-day car. So they're certainly fun to drive. yeah, instant acceleration. There's no sort of waiting for turbos to spin up or just to hit the torque band. It's just you're straight in. It's just put your foot down. The Kona, if I'm not careful, if I put it in sport mode, I will spin the wheels.
Okay. Someone's asked again about Teslas. Peter again, I think. There was talk of a Tesla 1 million mile battery. Is this just a journalistic excess, or?
I suspect that they're effectively as good as that now. When it comes to the Tesla batteries, they're only losing 1 or 2% of battery capacity a year. So if you were doing, I don't know, if 1 or 2%, at 10 years, you've lost 20%. And if you're doing 20,000, 30,000, say 20,000 Ks a year, that's 200,000, so 160,000. So, yeah, I suspect that the Tesla battery wouldn't be far off that now.
Well, that is extraordinary. Yeah. So, are there other questions that people have been wanting to ask?
I'm just having a quick look at the Q&A myself. When will Tesla be able to put energy back into the grid or house? That vehicle to grid stuff is interesting. Just trying to think of what's the best. And I'm a bit of a skeptic when it comes to vehicle to grid for home. So I will preface my remarks saying that I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm not a fan of it, but I don't see how it really is going to be all that practical. For instance, one of the beauties of owning an EV, and is you don't stop at petrol stations. You don't have to worry about refueling. It is literally just a moment's thought to plug it in. The last thing I want to do, my Kona at the moment, I would probably charge it once every couple of weeks. Normally I would charge about once a week. And the last thing I want to do is with a vehicle to grid system, I have to come home and plug it in. And the moment I go out again, if I go out 2 or 3 times a day, I have to unplug it and plug it 2 or 3 times a day. So that's the first practicality. Secondly, if I'm wanting it to soak up my solar energy during the day and feed it back to the grid at night, often people go out to work during the day, so it's not there. So it can't soak up your power. Thirdly, if you're away for the weekend and worried about a power failure, again, your car's away, so there's no battery there to back up your fridge. And fourthly, yes, home battery systems use new batteries, so why would you have 2 sets of batteries? But as I've said many times tonight, the future of storage systems is retired car battery cells. So what will happen is the home battery systems, in theory, should come down in price a lot when they're simply second-hand recycled good cells out of cars. So home battery systems should be able to come down in price considerably in the next 5 years as people start using recycled cells rather. So it's a good reuse of the cells there, and that system's tailored to it. It's there 24/7. It'll soak up your solar in the day. It'll feed back at night, and it's there for the times you're away when the power fails, so your fridge doesn't go cold. So that's the domestic side. So that's my sort of slight diatribe against vehicle to grid for home. On the other side is if people really do want it, it's capable of being done with CHAdeMO, but that's the system that Nissan and Mitsubishi use, and that system is effectively a legacy system now, and CCS DC charging is now the go, and all the world is changing out, including Nissan with their next Ariya will have, outside of Japan, CCS charging. But CCS is moving to vehicle to grid systems in the next 2 years. So they actually have a roadmap out. So at the latest 2025, it will be full vehicle to grid technology available. So you can actually start buying CHAdeMO system vehicle to grid systems in the next few months, but they are very expensive to have installed, and certainly more expensive than a home battery system. And the CCS systems will be available, but you're looking at probably 3-4 years away, maybe 5.
It sounds a bit like, from what you're saying, a bit like the situation in other fields where something that can do 15 jobs doesn't do any of them excellently. You're better to have something that's purpose designed and does the job really well, and have something else that's designed properly for that other job, and not try and combine them too much. But obviously it's an area where you'd need to get technical advice. The question I wanted to, or would also forward from the group, is about servicing. People are aware that with Tesla, for example, and that's just an example, you get on the blower and someone comes and picks up the car and takes it away and brings it back later, and your car's been serviced. But what about servicing? Here we are in Nillumbik. It's a fair way from the CBD. We don't necessarily go there for work. What's the servicing network like for EVs?
At the moment, appalling. It just, there's not enough EVs around for mechanics to make it worthwhile for them to retrain to work on EVs. It will happen, but the other side of the coin is EVs need bugger all servicing. Tesla don't actually have a service schedule. It's the car just says, I think something needs attending to, or it's about time someone checked something. And they send out a message, and the Tesla technician will ring you up and say, your car's telling me it needs some work done. When can I make a booking? So Tesla come to you. It's quite a nifty system. For my Kona, it's once a year. So I take it back to.
So where do you go for your Icona? Where do you have to go?
At the moment, the main dealers are either Doncaster or South Morang. I think there's about 4 in Melbourne. I think they're actually setting up more. There'll be more. All Nissan dealers, for instance, are supposed to be able to do electric Leafs as well. That was part of the first generation. It was only selected ones, and Nissan decided that didn't work that well because people got quite annoyed having travel long distances. So I believe all Nissan dealers must service and sell Leafs at the moment. That was part of the rollout of the next gen. So Kona's, there's more dealers being appointed for the what they call the Blue Drive network. So it's a matter of having a look. But again, it only needs every 15,000 Ks once a year. So it's not a biggie, and it only takes them an hour or two at most. So go away, have a coffee, come back, and it's basically. It was just, I actually took mine. I bought mine from South Morang because it was the only dealer that was doing it at the time, but it was early in the days. So it's a bit of a cut, lunch, and compass job for me. But oh well, once a year's not too bad, and I could maybe take it to Doncaster now. I'm hoping some of the nearer Hyundai dealers will start servicing them soon.
Well, the premium on servicing is so great that I imagine they will. I mean, that's where they all make their money now, isn't it? Rather than selling the car, it's
electric cars, that's part of the problem. They won't make money much on servicing. I don't mind paying $160 a year for them to basically do a safety check all over and update the maps, which is all they're doing.
$160 per annum for you to get your car serviced.
Yep, that's it.
Woohoo!
And that's pretty much what it's going to. That is what it's going to be for the life of the car, because there is nothing else to do unless you'll never wear the brakes out, or not almost never, because I use the regen all the time. I barely touch the brakes.
Yeah.
There's no brake dust on it after I've done 15,000 Ks in the first 6 months. So I had its first 12-month service in 6 months. And a year later, I've done an extra 7,000. So COVID slowed me down somewhat.
That is amazing. Yeah. Well, I rather think that I've got a number of messages that have come up here saying how much they've appreciated the session, and a few tips which I imagine people in the audience can see about where they get their cars serviced. And apparently there's someone in Hurst Bridge who's interested in EV servicing, which is good news.
One thing with the Good Car Company, when they do a group buy, they'll do within a particular area, and they'll advertise and through a community groups or whatever, and say we're doing a bulk buy in this area. They will set up a mechanic or two in that area that will work on them. That's part of the deal, that they make sure there is someone left behind afterwards who will still work on the things.
Well, that is impressive. So I think we've reached the point where we're starting to run close to our time limit in any case. So
actually, there's a good one in the chat line of saying someone paid $95 to get their Leaf serviced.
Yeah, exactly. $95, which is pretty promising. But I've also seen a number of messages, and I hope you have too, Bryce, saying how much they've appreciated it. I'd like
you're welcome.
Of course, for their participation, but particularly you. It's hard to get real expert advice as we've had this evening. Now, before you go, everybody, there's a very short poll that'll come up on your screen at the end. Please do fill it in. We'd appreciate it if you would do that. It helps us improve in the future. And we'll also email you a short evaluation, and be grateful if you could send that back to us as well. So, Bryce, once again, thank you very much. Great evening. Great analysis of the choices and issues and the technology, and good questions, as you've said.
Yeah, I was about to say, and some really good questions. Well, they're all good questions. It's just I really appreciate so that people give me the time to answer them, and occasionally go, I'm not sure on that one.
Now, alas, of course, in a session like this, we can't actually physically applaud you. So you'll just have to imagine, Bryce, that you're receiving a standing ovation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a fun night. Thank you.
Thank you for logging on. This is the ending of our seminar.